My name is Steve Bush, and I work in the Lafayette Campus Student Life Office. Thank you all so much for joining us here today for our Rush to Judgment Q&A. Today, we hope to explore the documentary you have viewed over the past week and get your questions answered directly from those who made the film. We've got Ryan and Steve here today. We'll intro them in just a moment. Again, to submit your questions for today's Q&A, please use the Q&A function, the chat option, or if you're watching on Facebook, we're monitoring that feed too. Just comment on this post. Questions that are upvoted or most commonly liked will get priority when it comes to answering them. Please make sure to join us for the entire session today, as one student who attends and participates for the full duration of the Q&A will be selected to win a free Latitude 3510 laptop, compliments of the Office of Student Life. The winner will be notified by 5 p.m. today, so keep an eye on your email until about 5 o'clock here today. Finally, if you are attending with us to be counted for attendance, please click on the link in the chat. Drop that in there a few times. I'll drop it in there intermittently as we go on through today's session. After clicking that link, you will be immediately directed to our calendar page where a blue banner will flash at the bottom of the screen. Once this occurs, your attendance will be logged. And now to our guests. Steve and Ryan are award-winning documentary filmmakers and educators who are committed to helping students, consumers, journalists, and content producers learn from the encounter at the Lincoln Memorial and social media posts and news stories that came from that viral video. Their goal is to help prevent future cases of media mayhem and hate. Steve Oldfield has also directed the award-winning documentaries Lines of Sight and Covington at 200 Points of View. He graduated from Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism and the Institute of Political Journalism. Steve is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Communications at Thomas More University. Ryan Anderson brings his extensive knowledge of blogging, political commentary, and independent media to Rush to Judgment. He also has worked in the cable television industry, producing and hosting and interviewing programming aimed at teenagers along with young adults. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests here today, Steve Oldfield and Ryan Anderson. Gentlemen, how are you doing here today?
We are great. This is so cool to be talking with people like yourself, and this is why we made it, was to engage with students. So this is really exciting for us.
Indeed, yeah. This has been quite a long passion project, more or less. But yeah, we're super excited to be here and talking with everyone. And
we will tell you, you heard in the bio, I did a doc on Covington. Our office is physically in Covington. We are less than 2 miles from Covington Catholic School. And so we were kind of living and breathing this from the very beginning. And to think that 2 years later, we're sitting down and talking about all this has been really crazy. We thought we have a little short video. We have a little short video to get us started, to take us back. It's hard to believe now, 2 years. Of course, all last year is kind of like a wash for most of us, right? But it's been 2 years since all this happened at the Lincoln Memorial. So here's a look at Rush to Judgment, just to remind us of where we're at and set that stage.
Saturday morning, January 19th, 2019. Twitter and Facebook are in a frenzy, getting angrier by the minute. A video going viral. An encounter at the Lincoln Memorial between students from Covington Catholic High School in Kentucky and a Native American activist.
Shows a group of teens harassing and mocking him in the nation's capital.
Soon, the media takes notice.
A troubling scene many are calling racist played out in Washington yesterday on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial.
Dozens of other students from the all-male private school are seen wearing Make America Great Again hats and shouting.
From across America to Canada's City TV.
It's this shot here that bothers me the most, I think.
And as far away as Australia and Malaysia. Celebrities and politicians are quick to comment, and YouTubers all over the world weigh in.
Kathy Griffin was saying, I need names, shame him, dox him. How do these people not understand the implications of that?
I blame that fucking kid. What a little smirk face.
When I looked at that kid's smirking face, I just saw hundreds of Brett Kavanaughs.
If you're anything like the 2/3 of Americans who get their news from social media, and sadly that isn't a joke, you've probably heard about the incident from last Friday involving students from Covington Catholic High School. What should have been a non-story about a somewhat passive-aggressive staring contest between man and boy quickly ballooned into a story on the racism-infused smugness of young white high schoolers from America, and then just as quickly into a story on social media outrage mobs jumping to conclusions.
And guys, I will tell you, I do a leadership program with high school kids, and I had done some work with Covington Catholic just about 2 months before that fateful day, January 19th, 2019. And I woke up, as I do every morning, my phone is by my bed. I'm an old guy, so I check Facebook, right? I'm not an Instagram or Twitter guy, I'm sorry. But, and my feed was blowing up. And I've worked in journalism my whole life. I have friends all over the country. And all of these people my age are saying this horrible stuff. These kids are all rednecks. They're all racist. They're all horrible people. Their parents are probably all cousins. You name it. It was being said by some pretty heavy duty names in the journalism business. And I was like, wait a minute. No, this can't be right. This has got to be a case of rushing to judgment. And I was on my phone till about 11 a.m. That's when I finally got out of bed. I was just so disgusted. And I called this guy, Ryan Anderson, and he came up with the name Rush to Judgment. And we were kind of off to the races, Steve.
Yeah, I was taken aback by many perspectives, and what I also appreciated by the film itself was the multiple perspectives that you guys were able to show too, because it really painted, as we talked a little bit offline earlier about, it really painted a holistic picture of what actually went on. What I'm pleased to see here is our questions are flooding in right now. And I would love to get to our students' questions because they are just, from what I could tell, just aching to ask you guys about a few things. So again, if you are looking to go ahead and ask a question, please use the Q&A function. You could also use the comment section on Facebook. Additionally, the chat function as well. If you see a question that you like on Facebook or in the Q&A, go ahead and give it a like or upvote the question itself. Those questions with the most likes or upvotes will get priority. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's take our first question here from Miss Tori Smith. Tori says, the editor mentions in the credits that there are a long list of news sources that were not willing to work on the documentary with the producer. Within those news sources, did you get a direct no, or were you completely ignored by those sources, or was it a toss-up?
Well, most of the time it was just a complete ignoring. There were a few that basically outright said, no, we're not gonna touch this. More of them that we got those kinds of no's from weren't really direct no's. They were more implied, like we can't really touch this kind of thought process. And I think that's mostly because of the lawsuits.
Yeah, and I will tell you, there was one news source that's a pretty big deal in Detroit. And we wanted to talk with them because Nathan Phillips is from Michigan. And they said yes. And then I booked a hotel room and was on the way up driving when I got this panicked call from the guy who said, I'm really sorry, but corporate shut us down. They won't let us talk to you. So that did happen. And a lot of people were just terrified. One of my best friends in the world is a big deal at NPR. And she said, I would love to talk with you, but we can't because they're worried about lawsuits. So yeah, I mean, that was very frustrating for us. It's a good question. No one has asked that before.
Well, not only a good question, but to kind of offshoot on that kind of underscores the whole title of your documentary itself, Rush to Judgment. Me, myself, before viewing the film, of course, we had the very obvious hook, in my opinion, with the red hat. But that's what attracted me to hear this opinion that you guys were presenting in the film. Do you believe that some of these news sources even watched your documentary to see what it was about? Because from my perspective, it wasn't anything what I thought it was going to be. And if you think the same way, go ahead and type in the chat. Maybe give your perspective on the film as well, students.
Well, and I will tell you, Steve, not only news organizations, but film festivals. I've been a film critic for 20 years. I covered Sundance for a dozen years. I've covered Toronto, festivals all over the world. And we can tell how long somebody watches a film. And a lot of them didn't make it through. And we actually halfway through changed our opening letter to the film festivals and said, we realize the first few minutes of our film may be triggering to some people. Please stay with it and you'll see that it's not what you expect. But we have every confidence that some people just look at the poster and freak out because they see a red hat and they're done.
Yeah, and that's precisely why I came up with the whole red hat thought process, because I know how divisive that can be, but I wanted people to look at that and then maybe read that message and say, oh, wait a minute, it's not what I think it says. Maybe I need to look at this further. And that was my whole thought process behind going with the red hat with the rush to judgment on there, saying, hey, maybe we'll get a better response if people look at it and go and get that click in their mind of, oh, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was. So I'm really glad you actually caught on to that.
Yeah, I mean, even students in the chat are commenting right now just about how many different perspectives there was throughout the film. And, you know, when you think they're about to zig, the film actually zags in another direction. So that's an interesting observation by some of our students. Another thing in the chat that students want to know is, do either of you have any specific affiliation with the school? I think, Steve, you might have mentioned something about that earlier.
Well, here's the irony of all this. And the older you guys get, when you get to be my age, you'll laugh at all the weird ironies that happen in your life. I went to Covington Latin School, not Covington Catholic. Covington Latin was frankly a little nerdy kid school where you skipped 7th and 8th grade and you went to high school. We didn't have a football team. We all grew up hating Covington Catholic, frankly, because they were the stud school that had a football program. They thought we were a bunch of nerds. We thought they were a bunch of dumb jocks or whatever. So I grew up, if you would have told me at the age of 18 or even the age of 30 that I would devote a year and a half of my life to defending the honor of Covington Catholic, I would have said you were completely nuts, right? But as an adult, I did some work at the school. I was very impressed with what they had going on. And I grew to see that there are some really good people there. And, but the doc needed this guy because he is the furthest thing from a Covington.
I'm an atheist, and I all that, like the religious portion of it, I don't agree with it at all. I have, my own reservations against that, all that. But the simple fact of the matter is regardless of your views, a person can be a person regardless. You gotta dig into each individual person and find out what they're about, not just take one aspect of that person and vilify them just because you don't agree with that.
So another question that kind of goes along with that fortuitously, it comes from Vito Perez. And Vito asks, why are news reporters taking things at face value nowadays instead of just doing their homework in the first place?
That's another great question. And I will tell you, as the old guy here who's been in TV news for 25, 30 years, I blame the internet for a lot of it. I think what happened was, and two things, this push to have 24-hour news. It used to be that you would get assigned a story as a reporter. Maybe you worked on it all day or 2 days. Now there's this, we find out about it, bam, bam, bam. We've got to go on the air with what we have. And the real problem with this particular case is it was a weekend. Hardly anybody works at even major networks on the weekend. It's a bunch of people, no offense, it's mostly young people, their first or second jobs that are working the weekend, and they're big internet people, and they saw it on Twitter. And once the Washington Post and CNN reported it, then it became God. It became news from God. And of course, it must all be correct. Nobody did any verification. Nobody bothered to look into it, because if Washington Post said it, it must be true. and they just retweeted and re-reported stuff and then it just snowballed. And that's the other thing we talked about earlier with another outlet, and that is in our world today, there's a lesson for everybody here to remember. Just because something's viral doesn't mean it's news, right? So just because there's a cute cat that learned how to go on a water ski, that shouldn't end up on the evening news because 6 million people watched it, right? That doesn't make it newsworthy. And that's what happened with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just said it all pretty much. I don't really have anything to add right at the moment.
Yes, the old adage, I believe it is paper never refused ink, correct?
Yes, exactly. And that's just and then it, like I said, the snowball effect in this thing was just amazing to us, and it just showed the power of social media and the power to radically alter and potentially destroy someone's life in a matter of minutes or days.
So another question that comes from the chat specifically, we'll go back to the Q&A just here in a moment. So the hat featured on your poster, of course, that's a big drawing point we've already kind of talked about a little bit. One student asks William Wands, he wants to know, and you may or may not know this, did the school actually provide the MAGA hats to the student? I believe this was also addressed in the documentary, but can you talk about that to maybe some people who might have missed that?
It wasn't provided by the school. Actually, they had no idea. Most of those hats bought right there on the mall, on the Washington Mall. We talk about that in the doc as far as how it's kind of like a souvenir. And even years ago during the Obama administration, there were plenty of people that were buying stuff for that, right?
Yeah, basically what happened was those kids ride the bus up all night. They do the March for Life, and then what they used to do before all this happened, the chaperones would say, okay, you've got an hour and a half before our bus gets here, skedaddle, run and check out Washington, D.C., come back and meet at the Lincoln Memorial. That's where we're going to get the bus home. Nick Sandman had probably had that hat for about 20 minutes when that whole thing happened, because there was a stand within walking distance of the memorial where they just bought the hats. And the hat salesman told us, no matter who you are, if you're from England, from Japan, that's the #1 selling hat in Washington, D.C. And people bought it to be ironic. People bought it to be fun. People bought it because it was a mega hat. And that's what happened in this case.
So our next question coming from another student. Their question concerns how incidents like this can be curtailed in the future. The documentary highlighted some legal action that is being pursued to hold accountable those doxing, misreporting, or otherwise threatening minors in social media and news. Do you have any information on what progress has been made in this area since filming the documentary?
Well, that's a really good question. And I know I keep saying that, but I'm being genuine. These are terrific questions on many levels. We had a video we were even going to show, but we can just paraphrase it. We interviewed the Commonwealth's attorney for Kenton County, who had launched this whole big investigation about actually trying to get criminal charges against people. And that is a danger. You know, you can't say in a tweet, just because you're angry, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to blow up your home. You could face legal trouble for that big time, criminal charges and civil penalties as well. So the civil cases are still winding through. What Nick Sandman did to sue these news organizations, several of them settled, but there are more lawsuits pending when it comes to that. As for trying to curb people's responses online, I don't know about you, but I still see really nasty stuff on my feed, and I'm reading a bunch of 40 and 50-year-olds. So I would like to say that a lot of things have changed. Maybe if more people see our doc,
yeah, that
it will.
Maybe. But the problem is that the whole and I can't ever say that word, being anonymous online just feeds into that, because you're not face to face. A lot of stuff that people will say online is not what they would say if the person was standing right in front of them. They might curtail, you know, and censor themselves for that reason, but just sitting behind your screen and typing away and, you know, saying what the deepest things, the gross stuff that comes to your mind because you think nobody's going to pay any attention. that's what we're trying to curtail with our doc, is trying to get people to be more able to basically conduct themselves civilly online, opposed to what they're doing now.
And I will tell you, Ryan taught me a term, virtue signaling. And that's so common here. And I will tell you, I think it's part of almost like human nature in the last 30 years, because back when I was a film critic, every year there would be a movie or two that was so universally hated that there was a competition that started among critics, who can be the most clever slamming this movie. The ultimate example of all time is a movie called Battlefield Earth that was a John Travolta movie. And just look up that on Rotten Tomatoes when we're done at some point, and you'll see it was a real competition. Who can say the most mean, awful, horrible thing about this movie? I happen to be one of the critics who didn't hate it. And I ended up being the subject of awful ridicule. A radio station in LA like tracked me down. I was working in Orlando, and I pick up the phone and they say, "You're live on the air. Why did you like this movie?" And it was just insane. And then when the internet happened, and Facebook and Twitter and all that happened, it just blew up that way.
Yeah, I think one of the important points that you guys just pointed out too, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there are better ways to talk about issues than bullying your opinion onto another person. And that could come in a variety of ways, and does not just apply to the political realm or the social justice realm either. That you're not doing good work by browbeating people or bullying people just because you disagree. So I think you underscored that too, and I think we all can agree that in any situation in life that's not good practice.
Yeah. And I guess the big thing to remember is, it's one thing to kind of playfully trash talk somebody. Like, I'm part of a group that doesn't like Ohio State. They're all Michigan fans and they say silly things about Ohio State, but it's all done kind of in jest. It's a whole other thing to say, we know where you live, we're going to burn down your house. And just imagine Nick Salmon having to go to his little brother and say, "Pack a bag, we have to leave our house now because people are threatening to scalp me and kill our family." And then they had to go stay in a safe house for a week, all because of what people said on the internet. So that's the big difference.
So another question that I wanted to get to immediately, because it does have to do with what we just talked about. A student is asking, Stacy's asking right now, what is virtue signaling exactly? Can you explain that? Can you define that to people?
So virtue signaling is basically going out and saying, not really taking any action to correct a situation, but saying something, jumping on a bandwagon, saying something, whether it's vile or even something good, but only saying it publicly in order to get people to look at you in more of a virtuous light. And there was a lot of that going on, where people were almost one-upping each other to try and say the worst thing that they could, so that the people that agreed with all the hate would say, "Oh, well, this person must be a good person because they are also saying bad things about this kid," right? That's what virtue signaling is. See, look at me, I'm a good person because I hate this kid.
And there were some Republicans who were doing that too. This wasn't all people who vote Democratic. The first day, there were plenty of Republicans who were out there slamming the kid as well.
So the next question that is in our Q&A comes from Madeline. In this documentary, there was talk about Democrats supposedly being all about equality, kindness, and peace, but the explosion from the media was said to show that Democrats are the complete opposite. Doesn't that seem stereotypical, rude, and somewhat like what people have been saying about Republicans in the media? Now, what I would like to give a disclaimer of before we go ahead and we answer this question is, remember, this is just an open conversation. This does have social justice and political components. So let's make sure that if we are going to share any other ideas or any other thoughts about political parties, let's make sure that they're tactful and respectful, much like Madeline has done, just so we can keep the conversation flowing in a positive manner. So to you, gentlemen.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. So doesn't that seem stereotypical, rude, and somewhat like what people have been saying about the Republicans in the media when it comes to the different types of stigmatization that Democrats have been given when it came to not being as peaceful as some might think they are.
Well, so
Joe Rogan, right?
right, Joe Rogan is saying that very thing. So here's, both sides will claim to be the good side, right? Because that's any time we talk about sides, you know, if you take this side, then guess what? I mean, it's not like you're going to jump on the side that you feel is the bad side, right? So whatever side you're on, you're going to think of yourself as, I'm the good guy, and so whatever they're doing is the bad guy, right? Bad stuff. And that's, in my opinion, probably the biggest part of what's going on in society now, is this othering thought process. I got to make them an other, not maybe we share some ideas and maybe we should have a real conversation. It's, you feel this way about this one thing, so you must be bad, whatever that situation is. And it goes on both sides. I mean, you see it on the left, you see it on the right, and it's in my opinion, it's just crazy.
And
to not talk and think what, you know, listen to other people.
And the person who made that comment was Joe Rogan, who is you're a big fan of Joe's. He's a pretty interesting guy. And he was basically saying something that kind of giving a little bit more of a historical perspective. And, you know, when I was a kid, I remember the anti-war movement in Vietnam. I was a little kid then. But when you thought of a Democrat, when you thought of somebody more on the left, you thought of somebody who was more flower power and like all about peace and nonviolence. Like you thought of Martin Luther King. You didn't think about, you know, showing up with a baseball bat saying you're going to beat somebody up or bashing a window in. That wasn't something that you thought the Democrats did. And I think that that's what Joe Rogan was saying that had changed, that had really surprised him. And that's just my thought on that.
Yeah. Because I mean, for the longest time, he considered himself more on the left of things, and he's kind of become more moderate over the years. At least that's how I perceive him anyway.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts about this film, we talked a little bit about this offline earlier, is that me personally, this is my opinion, I really didn't, after watching it, I didn't view this film as politically charged. And that might surprise some people. I didn't view this film as something that was Democrat versus Republican at all. I could definitely see where the hook comes in to play when looking at this movie and starting from maybe a broader, more aerial view of things, but then really honing in on the issues at hand and what actually took place. The lessons that are taught in this film, where can you see these things playing out in maybe other realms of our life outside of politics?
Well, I mean, debate in general. I mean, because there's a lot of things that aren't very, I mean, there's a lot of things that are becoming more political, but shouldn't be political lately. I mean, just for example, stupid thought process, this is just me free flowing here, the anti-vax movement, right? Most of the anti-vax thought process is, it's on the right. It very much is. A lot of that is religious driven and just no lack of facts being given out and misinformation given to these people. But unfortunately, you can't really have a conversation in that arena because people get stubborn and want to just stick to their guns.
And there were some Democrats who said, I'm not going to take a vaccine that Donald Trump pushed through this quickly. And now all of a sudden they saw President Biden get the vaccine. So now they're all on board with the vaccine. And now some Republicans are saying they don't want it. So yeah, it's a crazy, crazy. My mother is 94 years old. And she told me last week, watching the news, she said, I'm glad I'm on my way out because I've never seen it this nuts in her entire life. So that's yeah, I mean, everything is becoming political almost, right? You know, and I think even when you look at somebody like the Kardashians and that whole world, that seemingly you could kind of escape from the political commentary if you were going to just worry about what Kim was doing or whatever. And And then look at her husband, soon to be ex-husband, but he started wearing a Make America Great hat, right? So, and we put that in the doc for that reason, that, if the Kardashian people are even talking about politics, that makes you wonder what's going on with the world.
So another good question coming from the Q&A section from Heather Hawkins. And Heather says, although the documentary does give multiple perspectives and does show the irresponsibility of the coverage of this situation, have you been approached by anyone who still stands by the narrative that it initially had, even after watching the documentary? How do you or would you respond to claims that this still holds that perspective or narrative without causing conflict?
Well, I will tell you this while you're thinking of an answer to. My high school prom date is a very sharp woman who teaches in London, England. She's very international, one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. And she saw my post on Facebook about this, and she said to me, congratulations on doing the doc, but ugh, I just can't stand that kid. I just don't want to even watch anything about this. How could you spend your time working on this? And I said, trust me, watch the film. That was 2 weeks ago. She still hasn't responded. She still hasn't watched the film. If we get people to actually watch it all the way through, without question or without exception, really, everyone comes back and says, you made some really interesting points, and there were some things I learned that I didn't know before.
Well, I wouldn't say without exception. We did have a very early screening of a rough cut. It was only about, I'd say 45 minutes to an hour long during the Over the Rhine Film Festival. 2 years, almost, it was a few months after we had started. And I did get some pushback from a Native American fellow who just wasn't hearing it and wasn't wanting to. He basically said that we had maligned Nathan Phillips and made him out to look bad. And I was like, well, I sorry, but I don't feel that. I mean, he kind of made himself look bad in that whole situation, in my opinion. But beyond that, that's the only situation I can think of someone that's actually sat down and watched any of this and come back to say something like that.
Yeah, I will say too, we did make sure, and this had kind of changed from the Over the Rhine screening till the final film. Nathan finally did make a statement, and we ran the entire statement in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the doc, I guess, with what he had said. And it's kind of funny because a relatively conservative film critic said that he felt like we were taking pains to be more objective, and that drove him nuts, right? He said sometimes, what was the term? That it was sometimes, he didn't say painful, but he said that, like, he applauded us trying to be more objective, but at the same time, it was maddening, is the term he used. So we were kind of proud of that, because that was our intention, not to make somebody mad or to be maddening, but to try to have more balance there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of talk going on in the chat right now about the children that were involved in this, and call them teenagers, call them what you will. These are minors by the letter of the law, and what most would consider children. So what people are kind of talking about in there, and a question that has come up in the Q&A is, are there any laws that protect children from media outlets doing this to minors? Amy Scott wants to know.
Boy, and again, very smart. And you learn this in Journalism 101. I went to Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, which is a pretty hardcore program. And we learned it, the first year. And that is, yeah, you need parental permission. A lot of times, if you look at an average news story, you'll see if they go to a school, they've blurred out all the faces unless they have, unless the kids sign a waiver or a permission slip, or their parents sign something, more importantly, that says, yeah, you can videotape the kids. You may have noticed in our doc, when we show kids inside of Covington Catholic, their faces are all blurred. That was thrown out the window in this case. And some people said, well, yeah, they're on the mall, they're in a public place, and that does protect you with adults. It really doesn't protect you with kids. But the feeling was, once that video and that photo had been shown everywhere, every journalistic outlet, including the New York Times and, you know, the CBS Evening News and the McNeil Lehrer NewsHour and all these very, very, you know, I don't want to say stodgy, but like the more pillars of journalism, we're all like, okay, the picture's out there, we're just going to show it, right? So normally that is the case, that they shouldn't have been shown at all. And that, again, was part of this crazy rush to judgment and getting that out there. And so, yeah, so if any of you are thinking of being journalists in the future, definitely something you have to think about. You know, I would cover many stories at a school and we would have to get creative. Maybe we would show hands or we would show somebody's shoes or whatever, but very rarely would we ever show a face without making sure that the school had gotten permission. And you may remember when you were kids in school, you probably every year brought home a permission slip that your folks signed, that if a TV news crew came to campus, they could take your picture and not risk getting sued or not, you know, be violating the law.
So speaking of that, great segue into our next question. Miss Tori Smith, she's actually going to be a journalism major in the fall of this year, so fall 2021. Awesome, Tori. She asked, the way the media changes one story to me is insane, and I'm curious if either of you have any tips on how to see through the possible lies a news story or television article brings.
Well, actually, Steve and I were talking about this before all this, and I was saying that the best thing to do is watch both articles, read both articles, watch both stories on the news, from both sides, and whatever matches between those stories is probably the facts at hand. Everything else you can kind of throw out and not worry about, because that's probably their opinion or their little spin on it. But if Fox News is saying one thing and CNN is saying the exact same thing as far as the points go, then those two are probably saying that's the fact of the story. The rest of it, where they differ, go ahead and throw that out and use just the facts to form your opinion.
The other thing I'll tell you, if you're doing long form projects, you've got to confirm everything yourself, which in this immediacy of TV news is very difficult. But like when I was doing a documentary on this painter, Jim Hall, he was in his 80s. His memory was kind of foggy. He kind of left the impression that he had graduated from UCLA. And I said, hey, Jim, I would love to get a shot of that diploma to put into the doc. Well, then I came to find out, actually, he didn't graduate. He took some classes there. And he remembered a story that his father had been arrested for shooting a man. And I said, you know what, can you give me the dates or anything? And I had to actually go back into the records and find a shooting from 1941 and the arrest records and the jail records. It turns out he had the names all wrong. So if I would have just gone by what he told me, I would have put wrong information in the doc. And it was a little embarrassing and awkward to kind of go back to him and say, hey, Jim, just so you know, this is what really happened, right? But if I wouldn't have done that, I would have had egg on me. So you be the one, if you're going to be a journalist, you be that person who's always like, wait a minute, we really need to confirm this on our own, independent confirmation, rather than just believing what you read somewhere else. Because in this case, you may remember, everybody reported that Nathan Phillips was a Vietnam War vet. And come to find out, well, no, he actually repaired refrigerators in Nebraska. That's a lot different than being on the front lines in Vietnam and dodging napalm, right? Or Agent Orange. So you've just got to take that extra step.
I have a question from Becky, and Becky asks, do you have any future documentaries, or are you working on documentaries that will shift the bias in media today? I believe you are the next best thing, and I am rooting for you.
Oh.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
As far as works in progress is for this thought process, no. We do have a couple things that we're working on. One is based on a local artist. It's called Art for Auschwitz. We've already pretty much got all the film. We're just working on the editing and putting the whole thing together.
But honestly, we feel like the current generations, and mine included, are kind of a lost cause. So that's why we're doing these college speaking tours. We feel like if we can reach the next generation of journalists. Last summer, we spoke at a group in Washington and filed this away for the people who want to be journalists. There's a group called the Institute on Political Journalism, the Fund for American Studies. They do a summer program in Washington where they set you up with an internship with a major news organization. You get to typically have a byline of like an article that you get to write. They have seminars on, ethics and journalism. I was part of that first class in 1985, and that's Joe Stars, who you see in the doc. And, we spoke to their whole group last summer, and then we had, 40 or 50 students go back to their colleges and hopefully spread the word. So we feel like speeches like this are the best way of hopefully changing the future of journalism that way.
Yeah.
So a little bit more of a technical question, but still along the same lines of making a documentary. We have, it looks like we've got several journalists and potential documentarians here in the virtual audience today. A couple questions. So what software did you use to edit your videos? I want to know if it's Adobe or not. And how did that editing process go? Riley wants to know.
Well, Riley, I'm going to admit something to you. And again, it's because I'm the old guy and it's kind of embarrassing. We used Adobe Premiere Elements, not Adobe Premiere Pro. Pro is the account that you have the subscription, and it's a lot more complex. You might notice documentaries typically don't have a lot of fancy schmancy editing kind of stuff in it. It's almost like straight cut, like a film. And frankly, our budget couldn't afford Premiere Elements, and I didn't want to have to learn a new program. And at the time I was teaching at a high school where I thought Elements was perfectly fine for that. And so we edited it, and you want to grab the camera over there. We edited with Adobe Premiere Elements. And I will say, we just had a conversation the other night. We made this for no money at all. Here's the camera we used for most of it. It's a little Sony camera. Ryan bought this nice little thing on the top, right? We had a mic that was from Radio Shack. Radio Shack is now out of business, but with a little audio recorder that cost us $100 at Guitar Center. And we were kind of off to the races for an investment of about $2,000 or whatever. Since then, I bought a Sony a7 III with a really good lens, and we want to try to be more cinematic. But if we actually have a budget for our next film, we're going to hire like a cinematographer, hire another editor who can make it look fancier. But we basically, like Ryan would get all the video off of YouTube, and then we would edit like a rough cut. I would show it to him. He also had Adobe on his laptop. I have a big, kind of an old fashioned, what is that called? Desktop. See, I don't even know the names of stuff like that. But, and then if we ran into issues, like you may remember there was an interview with the Hebrew Israelites, and the audio on that was completely unusable. It was horrible. There was like this ringing sound.
Yeah, there was like this buzz in the microphone that just we couldn't figure out how to get rid of. So we had to hire somebody.
Yeah, so I hired a former student. We gave him that little snippet of audio and said, please fix this. And then we put it back in. So yeah, I mean, we made this on a shoestring budget with Adobe Premiere Elements and Adobe Premiere, no, what's it called?
Well, I've got
Photoshop.
Yeah, and Photoshop. And I think I've got Pro on my laptop.
Yeah.
Shifting back towards the documentary a little bit more, Madeline has another question. She said the kid in the situation says in the documentary that he felt that he couldn't walk away because he felt unsafe or something along those lines. So he just stood there. But shouldn't Nathan Phillips, the Native American in the situation, have felt unsafe considering he was the one surrounded by the kid's friends? What do you guys have to say about that?
Well, I would say he shouldn't have felt Nathan shouldn't have felt unsafe, being that he pushed himself into that crowd. If you watch real closely, you'll see that he walks well past a big gap that if he was actually attempting to get up to the Lincoln Memorial, he had plenty of opportunity to do so. But instead, he and his group pushed into the group of students. And as far as Nick's opinion goes, and I'm maybe paraphrasing a little here, he said that he felt it would have been disrespectful to turn his back on him and walk away. And not only that, but he didn't really have much of an opportunity to do so because they were all surrounded by the kids. So when he decided to just stand there, that's pretty much what he felt he could, that was his only option at that point.
And he was actually standing on a step with another person right behind him on another step. And then, as we showed in the doc, when it was all over and the kids went away to their bus, Nathan and his crowd didn't continue up the stairs to go to the Lincoln Memorial. And one of the other guys beating a drum said, "We won, Grandpa, we won." And but then magically within 24 hours was this whole narrative that he was threatened and terrified and feared for his life. So Ryan watched the whole unedited video and came to me and said, "I got to tell you, this is showing up a lot differently than the little clip we saw on the news." And thank the Lord for cell phone different angles, because that showed what had honestly really transpired.
Yeah.
So a question about maybe some social media legislation that is going on right now. Justin asked, do you think that if Section 230 were repealed, social media platforms would have more of an impetus to prevent this type of doxing that we saw here? So maybe define what doxing is, and then potentially give your thoughts on that question.
Well, I mean, doxing is, of course, just putting out someone's personal information without their permission, and doing so in order to try and get people to take maybe some kind of action, whether it be sending threats or showing up at their place, at their residence or whatever. Basically just hoping that somebody will do something bad with that information. That's what doxing is.
Nick Sandman said in our documentary, you may remember, he said, "You're not doxing somebody because you want to send a cake to their house."
Right.
You're doing it because you want to really, mess with them. And his father actually is part of a movement here in Kentucky to have a doxing law on the books, that if you dox a minor, you get in big legal trouble. And I think it's an important issue. I think it's one that should have a national, not just, it shouldn't be. The weirdest thing about the United States to me, to get on a soapbox for a second, is how one state can have legalized marijuana and another one can't. And one state can put you in jail for 10 years for something, in another state you get probation. I mean, I would love to see a federal law protecting minors against doxing, and frankly, anyone against doxing. I think it's one of the worst things about the internet is that within 5 minutes of reading something, you could be going to someone's house and or trying to get them fired from their job or anything else.
Yeah, but as far as any legislation, I mean, I look at it this way: as far as speech goes, the only way to combat bad speech is with good speech, right? You can't shut people down and keep people from talking and expect that that's going to fix the problem, right? You have to confront them, not in a violent way or anything, but in an intellectual, let's sit down and talk about this, and let's see what we can do to, maybe we'll come to common ground on something. But by shutting people down or making social media platforms responsible for what people are saying on them, I don't think that's necessary, nor do I think it's a good idea, because the moment you start doing that, then they're going to be the ones to start censoring people. And I'd rather have the worst speech out there with somebody then turning around and saying, "Wait a minute, that's not real," or "That's not the case," than have that speech be taken offline and put into a back alley room or a back room kind of thought process where it's just going to fester with no challenges.
And I'm a little more to the side where I think there needs to be more of that, but I totally get what you're saying. That's the other thing, guys. If we're both, when we started this, both kind of identified as more libertarian, and we also have had some differences of opinion politically, but we were able to work together and make a doc, and we're still going to make more projects together. And all your friends don't have to think exactly alike. It's okay to have some differences, right? And we just have civil discourse. He's more civil than I am, but we have civil discourse.
So the $1 million question, and it's come in different forms a couple of times along the way here this afternoon. What's your guys' opinion on the situation? Who was right? Who was wrong? Was anybody right? Was anybody wrong? Is there a particular narrative that you believe over another? What do you think happened here is what I'm getting from our audience right now. What's your opinion on the situation?
Want me to go first, or you want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. I was thinking about this today on the way over because I thought this question might come up. I had a lot of people in the first 48 hours say to me, at the time I was working at a nonprofit that was a really big social justice kind of place. And they were like, those parents should be in big trouble. Those kids had no business wearing those racist mega hats and blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they were racist mega hats because that's a whole other can of worms that would take an entire hour to talk about. But I would just say the one error, I think if there were any errors that were made by the kids, was just thinking about the optics and the larger situation. I would compare it to if you were going out bar hopping in Columbus, Ohio on a Friday or Saturday night, and you thought it would be a good idea to wear all Michigan gear into the bar, right? That's the equivalent of wearing a Make America Great hat in Washington, D.C., which is it 70% African-American, right? Probably 80% or 90% Democrat. And you're going to walk around with a Make America Great hat, probably not the best idea. But again, the kids bought it as a souvenir, as many other people do. Did that make them racist? Were they trying to say F you to people? Not really. They were a bunch of kids, right? And and that was the part that really upset me all the way around, was watching all these media outlets, again, title of our film, Rush to Judgment, and make all the read so much into the look. The other thing I said to Ryan that I can reveal to you guys, we posed for a picture with Nick Sandman when this whole thing was over. And when we looked at it, he had that same look on his face. When he was trying to be nice and smile with us, it was not a look like, you know, I'm a racist and you're a horrible person, and I'm trying to be rude to you. That's just kind of how he looks, right? But to sit back and watch how much people read into things and rush to judgment because of their own biases and preconceived notions and what they were told on a fake Twitter account that wasn't even a real person who started this whole thing. That was what moved us to try to do something about it.
Yeah. And as much as in a day-to-day situation, I myself probably wouldn't want to associate with most of the people from Covington Catholic or any of that situation. As far as what happened there, I mean, the more and more I watched, because I watched, like he said, Steve said earlier, I watched close to 300 hours worth of YouTube videos, not just, you know, pundits talking about it, but the 2-hour Hebrew Israelite video I watched from beginning to end. Numerous angles I watched. I watched a lot to try to figure out where things actually sat, what was actually happening. And as far as it goes, did the kids do anything wrong? I mean, maybe they antagonized a little by doing their school chants, but were they thinking that was going to be antagonistic? Probably not. Were the Hebrew Israelites in the wrong for spouting what they were spouting? Absolutely. I don't agree with anything that they were talking about. And as far as Nathan Phillips goes, I mean, he marched himself right into that situation, almost looking for a reason to try to get himself on the news, and stuck around DC in order to get on the news. You know, in that little bit of snippet of video, all they did was stare at each other and Nathan pounded on a drum. Did anybody really do anything truly wrong there? I mean, no cops were involved. Nobody threw any punches. Words were spoken, some, not from Nick. Nick didn't say a word to him. He just stood there, tried to calm one of his friends down because he didn't want him getting into it with him. I mean, Did he really do anything wrong? No. But again, I don't think Nathan really did anything wrong either. Like, I mean, was he kind of a jerk for pounding a drum in somebody's face? Yeah. Like most of the people said in our doc, they wouldn't have handled it as calmly as Nick did. I don't know how I would have handled it at 18 or even 16.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
One of my favorite pundits in the movie is a woman named Kim Iverson. And that's what she said. She said, I wouldn't have handled it as well as Nick Sandman. And yeah. And so that's our answer to that, I guess.
So we've got a couple more questions here I wanted to get to, and I want to be mindful of your time. Again, we appreciate you guys being here today and the great conversation that is going on right now. But one of the questions before I get to the finale here is students are asking where can they view the film? How can they get out there? How can they support it?
Aren't you awesome?
Yeah, rushtojudgmentdocumentary.com. I mean, it's that simple. Head to rushtojudgmentdocumentary.com. It's there. You click the link through there and it'll take you to Vimeo. There's an option to buy it. There's an option to rent it. There's also on our website, there's also an option to buy one of our hats if you want. Both the one from the beginning and the one at the end that says, "Don't rush to hate." You know, those are the best ways to support us in this. Also, share us on your social media. Get us out there. Do what you can. Talk about it to other people and share what you can. We appreciate every ounce of it.
Yes, that's rushtojudgment.com. I will be sure to send that info.
rushtojudgmentdocumentary.com.
Excuse me. Okay, rushtojudgmentdocumentary.com.
Yeah. And then Vimeo is another way to do it. Yeah.
Well, mispronunciation or not, I have the proper link that I will be sending out when we wrap up this conversation here today. So thank you so much. The final question that I want to ask, well, not I want to ask, but Megan Smith wants to go ahead and ask, I'm just moderating here, is what can one person do to help stop incidents like this from happening again in the future? What type of responsibility do I have, do our students have in preventing things like this happening in the future?
The easiest and most straightforward answer I can give you is think before you post. Straightforward. Just think about what you're posting. Don't just go, oh, that headline looks interesting, I'll share it, without having read the article, without thinking about what you're putting out there. Really think before you post.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And don't be afraid to, private message a friend and say, hey, look, I just saw this. You might want to rethink this or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have to shame them on their feed, right? But you can private message them and say, yeah, you might want to think about that.
Yeah.